2021, Roku TV, Amazon Fire TV, Android TV, Apple TV, See Love World, Google TV, LCBNTV.com, LifeComTV.com. Download LCBN TV app from Google Play and App Store. LCBN TV, just in time.
Good evening and welcome to Roundtable Talk on LCBN TV. I'm Rev Faith and I'm so happy to have you back this week as we continue our discussion about racial injustices. Today we're going to have on our panel some specialists, I would say, or pastors who have expert advice on racial injustices and racial reconciliation, who are going to help us discuss this matter and help to delve into the issues that people have been asking about on Facebook. And I have a list of questions of the audience. So audience questions will be thrown to the panel as well today. So if you are joining us, please remember to share the Facebook link to your friends and allow them also to participate in the show. I will be reading out some of your questions as they come through. So tonight on my panel, I have with me, I'm very delighted to announce that I have Reverend Canon, Yemi Adedeji. Good evening.
Good evening. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for joining me on the roundtable this evening. I also have Bishop Joe Aldred. Hello, Bishop.
Good evening. I'm very pleased to be with you at the roundtable. I'm just wondering where the food is.
Oh, don't worry. We'll dig into that in a minute. And it's very appetizing, I can tell you. Well, and the third guest I have with me this evening is Pastor Jonathan Oloyede. Thank you for joining me, Doctor. Or is it Doctor or is it Pastor?
Yes, it's Doctor. It's Pastor. It's Jonathan. Just call me Jonathan. Good evening, everyone.
Welcome, everybody, and welcome to my panel this evening. Thank you for joining me tonight. Well, I'm going to start straight away and ask my first question this evening. In light of all the debates on social media and all the protests that have been taking place since the murder of George Floyd, the church has been shaken, I will say, in its core by the congregation and church members who are asking the question, is racism prevalent in the church or not? And my question goes to Reverend Yemi. Is racism existing in the church?
Well, if the Archbishop of Canterbury himself have to apologize for racism within the Anglican Church, which is the main church for the Church of England, then we have to accept that the umbrella that governs most of the church in the UK that is existing there. And I'm sure it's like that. All the other leaders of other churches will echo the same. But what is important is to distinguish what you mean by racism, because oftentimes the definition will define the consciousness of how people feel and how we treat each other, or the effect it has on the other people. Now, to answer your question, do racism exist in church? Absolutely. I've had the privilege of speaking to so many of heads of churches who leads majority white churches in this country. And then they've come to the understanding that probably their own unconscious bias have exposed their own prejudice towards the things that they would not have imagined before, that what you call racism is the existence. Now, have I faced it myself? Absolutely. In my journey being either as a missionary with Church Mission Society, with the Church of England and all of that, yes, I've had quite some experiences in my journey as a church minister. And that's what we are here to talk. So I'll leave the rest to my colleague to put light in that.
Lovely. Dr. Jonathan, have you encountered racism and in what form?
I think every Black man on the planet in one shape or form can say that he's encountered racism in one way or the other if he lives in the West. I believe that, and I have experienced it, but I would not say as much as maybe some others have experienced it. But it exists because, as my colleague has said, Canon, unconscious bias of many people, sometimes unknown understanding of culture or people's orientation to relationships can give people what I would call blind spots. And people don't understand culture, or sometimes what they need to, how they need to purport themselves or conduct themselves when it comes to some other culture. So yes, racism exists in the church, both from outside of the Black community and within the Black community as well.
Okay, well, Bishop, what is your experience of racism specifically within the church?
Well, I think there are two primary places from which Black people in this country experience church. One is from within the historic white-led, white majority mainline, sometimes called churches, where some Black people do church, and some of those relationships go back to, you know, the Anglican Church, the Methodist, the Baptist, the Catholic, existing in my case in the Caribbean, in Jamaica, where I was born, and so people have come here with that history. But the other place from which Black people in the UK experience church is within the Black-led church, or the Black majority churches. That's where I have been living ever since I came to this country as a boy, back in the late 60s. And so if you say, have I experienced racism in the church, me as a Black person growing up in a Black context, where my minister was Black, the choir leader was Black, the musicians were Black, the choirs were Black, not in that space, except that my own church has its roots in the deep south of the United States. And so I have seen when those representatives have come down to the UK at conventions, for example, and other places, how you can still see a colonial hangover, where that's where real power lies in the deep south of the United States. So it doesn't directly impact on me, but it indirectly impacts on me. And in terms of the Black people who do church in mainstream churches, as we call them, then I would say I've heard numerous testimonies and read of numerous testimonies of where race in the church has been perpetrated.
So Pastor Yemi, when they say that there is, some people don't feel as though there is racism, but it's not overt racism, it's subconscious bias, it's subconscious racism. What is all that about? Because to me, you know, bringing injustice against someone because of its race or its color is racism. So why are we coming up with all these different definitions today?
Well, you are talking about microaggression, which most people, it's not overtly open, but it is there. One good example, which I keep correcting my white friends, is when they see you and they ask you the question, where are you from? So it's a very, very embarrassing question. Where am I from? What do you mean? I'm from London. Okay, I don't mean where London. Where are you from? Where are you originally from? You know, so it's a kind of a statement that you don't belong here. Where are you from? So rather than asking about my heritage, you are asking that I don't belong here. So and then you almost want to say it in some of the expression, maybe the way you even talk, your joke, the nuances, the expressions, and it flows through all manners of ways in which it's been expressed. It could be in employment, it could be in our educational system, it could be in the way we even I mean, if you're a man and you drive a good car, you obviously are going to be stopped by police one time along the road to ask you whether that car belongs to you or something like that. I've experienced that. So, and when I talk to my colleagues, they will say, but I've never experienced that before. That's never happened to me before, you know. So these are the sort of things you get used to, and it's part of life. And I guess what has happened now, like I always say, is when you've gone through such pain over a period of time, you carry a wound, and there's been a plaster on the wound. And that's why all this, I won't call it aggression, but the demonstration and the people being able to speak out a lot now.
But what I'm concerned about, Pastor Yemi, is that our white counterparts would say that there is no racism and that they've never realized that there was microaggression or you know, against their Black members or against other people in the Black mainstream churches. And
because you're
I find it really, yes, go on.
You're a majority in a minority. You will never find it. It's your land. It's majority of your own people. You're around the same people that you engage in, having the same thinking process and all of that. A good example for me, I'm sure my colleagues will understand that. If you're a Black minority in a majority of white leaders at a meeting or a conference or in a gathering or in a board, they wouldn't see the pains of what you are carrying. They wouldn't see some of the nuances and some of the expression and some of the things. It's normal. But to you, you have to carry all those pains along with you. But until we start to speak it out, then they understand the context of where we are coming from and what is painful to us. And that's why most people that I'm speaking to right now, my white colleagues, they are kind of thinking back and say, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't recognize that. I didn't know that that has an effect on people. I didn't know that. So some of it, like Jonathan said, is an unconscious bias, but it requires education so that people.
Can I just jump in a minute? You see, the point that Yemi made a while ago about being asked about where you're from, that's a question that does not bother me in the least. If somebody asks me, where are you from? No, where are you really from? It's a question I ask people quite often when I meet them. You know, so the reason why that is so agitating for some of us, I wonder if it is because we are trying so desperately hard to be British, to be indistinguishably British, so that when you ask me where am I from, you are implying that I'm not as British as I want to be, and I just wonder sometimes whether some of that microaggression is a telltale sign about how we sit in relation to, for example, my Africanness, my Caribbeanness. Now, for me, one of the scriptures that is very close to my heart is Jeremiah 29, the Old Testament, the Jewish Bible, our Old Testament, where Jeremiah writes to the exiles in Babylon. And he tells them, you know, remember who you are. Remember, you may be living in Babylon, you may be in captivity, but you are still Judeans. You are still Jews. You are still Israel. So never lose sight of that identity. And it just bothers me sometimes, honestly, that it seems that we are too keen not to have, not to be tethered to my Africanness. I'm from the Caribbean, but I'm in no doubt my roots are in Africa. So I'm an African living in diaspora. So if you ask me, you know, somebody say, where are you from? Oh, goodness, I was born in Jamaica and my people were taken away from Africa. Am I upset because you asked me where am I from? You better not.
Yeah, so but I think there's a double-edged sword to that, because sometimes nuances, it depends on how you read it sometimes. And sometimes when a person asks a question, and I just use the example, where are you from? I mean, I'm from Nigeria. I'm very proud I'm Nigerian. I know Reverend Yemi is a very proud Nigerian. But sometimes when you are engaging with people from another culture, there are what I would call blind spots. I remember presenting a national program to a number of white leaders of something that I believe had to be done. And one of my mentors, who was Black, said to me that he said, when you're engaging with white leaders, you have to be very, very clear in terms of what you want to do and how you want to do what you need to be done, and you have to be quite detailed. And I understood all of that. But what then I found was that when it comes to leadership, and I was leading the national movement, and majority of the people that I was leading were white, and a number of people will come up to me and they will question my leadership and my capacity to lead. And I didn't understand that initially. They were almost like I probably had a blind spot. I just thought they were innocent questions until other people began to say, look, the reason why they're asking these questions is because they're not sure whether you have the capacity to lead them because you are Black and they are white. And these are nuances that can go on in a conversation, on a relationship, or in a community, or in any setting. And sometimes you're not even fully aware how other people are thinking until certain things come to light. And this is going to can only come out through honest dialogue to say, this is what I really meant by my question, or sorry, I didn't know that the way I said that actually was off from the way I presented it to you.
So are we saying, therefore, then, when we are part of a mainstream churches and we are sitting there, we are a member, we bring our children to church, we participate fully, and then we want to access leadership, and there is a ceiling above our head which says, well, no Blacks are allowed, or just a few are allowed? What is the answer to that? Are we calling that unconscious bias as well?
I don't think so, because I've had quite a bit of conversation with some of the white church leaders. For example, it wouldn't mind me mentioning it. I had a 90-minute conversation with the Bishop of Winchester, who we served together at CMS. CMS has been existing for, Church Mission Society has been existing for 170 years, doing ministry in Africa, but they've never had one Black person on their board. I became the first African on their board, but I have to leave after 2 years because I told him that I couldn't accommodate the environment as it is. You can be invited, but not that you have to take the statistics, but not really to contribute. And so when I had a conversation with him, which is going to be broadcasted very soon, I was very clear with him, and he was open in that it's difficult. He admitted it's difficult to bring it's a matter of unconsciousness that they are trying hard now, but it's difficult, but they couldn't see it, to bring someone of color into the leadership role. Or rather, you almost want to say they fit this place, but the other bit, it belongs to us. So there's a conscious understanding now that when we are going to recruit, we want to recruit to the leadership role. I have a couple of organizations now that I'm consulting for, and they have laid it upon me to help them to recruit now into the leadership role of their organization, in the role of directors and on their board. Now, what caused all this? George Floyd. So we should be grateful for George Floyd in what the awareness it has created in people now understanding that we're not just needed on the ground level where you have no influence, but until you sit on the table with those who make decisions, you have no power or no influence.
Yeah, one common, if I may.
Yeah.
One common theme that has happened, and I'll just throw it as an example, and I'd like my colleagues to respond, is that over the years that I've spent in the UK, I've come across quite a number of occasions where churches or church plants or branches within a wider denomination are led by white leaders, and the majority of the congregation are Black. Or sometimes when a white congregation and then you have a Black leader, and then over time the congregation turns gradually into a Black congregation and the white people leave. And that has been something that has happened time and time again in many churches, and many pastors can tell you the same thing. It's a theme that has happened in so many settings where it seems as if it's more comfortable for white leaders to lead minority or Black people, but when the Black person or leader tries to lead a white congregation, there can be a reaction from the congregation.
Bishop, how do we answer that? Because to me, the fact that a member of the church cannot access leadership and in a mainstream church, and when they do access the leadership or start leading the church, then the white folks leave in numbers. What's the answer to that?
I think in America they call that white flight. And we've seen that here on many occasions. What's the answer? Listen, some people think I'm Anglican, and I say no, I'm not Anglican. I've always been.
No, you can't be Anglican. You can't be.
I know, but of course Anglicanism is all around the world. So what we see of it here in this country is not the only version of Anglicanism that there is. But anyway, but I'm not. And the main point I'm making is that I think, if I'm honest, I think I would find it difficult myself to be in a church as a Black person in England where the leadership was white. And I would. And I remember being in a white-led Pentecostal church a couple of years back. I just popped in, and when you look across the 1,000 or 1,500 strong congregation, it was spot the white face. You really hardly could see anybody that wasn't dark of skin. The 5 people who went to the microphone that day, from the worship leader to the preacher to the person who gave thanks to the offering to the person who gave the notices, all of them were white. Now, I'm saying to you, I could not attend a church like that Sunday after Sunday. I couldn't. And I have been saying to Black Anglicans, Black Methodists, Black, mainstreamers, that if you go to that church, and that's very often, because I was saying earlier, it's their historic church, then please don't show surprise at racism. Plan for it. And what I encourage people to do in those spaces is to establish Black caucuses where you support each other and where you almost become a threat internally to the complacency of racism within that structure. And the reason I say all of that is to say this, that sometimes when we talk about racism in Britain, we talk about it as though it is something that we have just discovered. Racism, we must not discuss racism ever taking it away from its historic rootings, its historic roots, its historic moorings, because that's the only way it makes sense. So I am talking about that over the last 600 years or more, we have seen the relationship between white Europe and Black Africa, extend that to the Caribbean and the Americas, as one of dehumanization by white folks over Black folks, and the justification of that dehumanization by categorizing slaves, as they did in America, as 3/5 of a human being.
Wow.
And by developing pseudo-scientific rationale for why it is that people who look like us on this set are not as fully human as they. We're further down the evolutionary chain. Now, if you attach it to that history and you accept, as I certainly do, that throughout the fabric of society in the West, that racist thought is not only on the surface, it is embedded. It's embedded in the language. That's why you get, it's a black day, isn't it? And don't tar me with the same brush. That's where it's embedded in there. Now, if you recognize that that is true, then I'm saying to you, if you then choose to live your life in a church that is white-led, don't be so surprised. Plan for it when you see and experience racism in those churches.
We've heard of the plantation mindset, whereby if we look at the history of where the racism all started, and how our race has been subjugated to slavery for so many years, people say that there is a thought that says that people who go to the mainstream churches have the plantation mindset, whereby they need to have a white leader because it doesn't feel right to be in a black church, or they have that subconscious need to be in an environment where leaders of the white skin will give them orders or direct their lives, so they will feel more comfortable in following their leadership. What are your thoughts on that? Anybody on the panel?
I think that's a general is a general idea. It's not specific. It could have an effect. That could have been a trauma effect from those who generationally have originated from their great grandparents, or they have historical antecedent to slavery, which that will have had an effect on them. But I wouldn't say that. Maybe Jonathan will back me up. If you are from Africa, particularly the West African Nigerian, where your origin is there from, I wouldn't say that such people will have that mindset. A typical Nigeria actually want to overthrow a white man and come into the role and the position. You know, that they have an ambitious mentality. In fact, they don't like being ruled. They all want to take control of themselves. Now, it's different from other people, which what you have said, I've seen it in many instances. And it's also different from our millennial generation, who actually have mixed a lot within the culture and the context, who will not see much of what we see in our background and context. So they probably might feel comfortable in the early days, but I tell you, as they begin to get into the middle age of 30 and thereafter, then reality hits them, because then they begin to see all the experiences that has cascaded down, like Bishop said it, and then suddenly the rooster come back home. And so there's so many expression into all of this thing. You can't paint it with one brush. Basically, that's what I'm saying.
What's your view, Dr. Jonathan?
I feel that it's a deep-seated, complex, neither black or white situation, because depending on your generation, how old you are, sometimes determines how you respond to certain context. So certain people go to certain churches historically because that's their identity. They identify with the Methodist Church or the Anglican Church. And so sometimes it is an identification with a denomination, whether the leaders are black or white, it then becomes secondary. And so they are Methodist, and that's why they go to a Methodist church in that town or in that locality or that region. Sometimes that's just the case. Sometimes it's because they can't be bothered to using Bishop's example. They can't be bothered to create caucuses of power to respond to a construct that they just feel they don't have the power to address or change. They've kind of given in to, this is just the way it is. This is the way this is going to be, and there's nothing I can do about it. The George Floyd protests, I heard so many people on TV, on platforms, on social media platforms, that said this is different. We did a number of conversations on our social media platform in church, and I had men in their 60s and late 50s who are telling me that they've spent most of their lives here in the UK, and they've never seen this type of response or protest against racism, and that this is different because it's not just the black community rising up, it is beyond just the black community. Other generations and other people, and even white, Caucasian, Western people are also rising up. Young people and older people say this, enough is enough. So what am I saying? I'm saying that sometimes people either just give in to a construct and feel they can't do anything about it because they don't have the power to. And sometimes people identify with a particular church, and that's why they stay there irrespective of who is leading.
Mm.
The plantation mentality that you refer to, Faith, is alive and well. You look across this country.
Okay, let's
You
say
look.
it again. I wasn't sure whether it's true. Is it still alive?
It's alive and well. Let me just show you 1 or 2 examples, if I may. You look across this country at the moment, and you will see that practically maybe 90% of the Black people who are national leaders, 90% of Black footballers are married to whites. If you look at the last census, 2011 census, the Black community is the largest minority group in mixed marriages. It is as though, and of course everybody is free to marry who they want, but I'm just showing you a trend. The Catholic Church the other day some time ago said that they are the largest Black majority church in the country. And although the Pentecostal churches are much vaunted, there are in fact more Black people attending mainstream white-led churches in this country than attending Black churches. I have heard it said on more than one occasion. In fact, one example I give you, I remember distinctly a Baptist woman some years ago, and I've had close liaison with the Baptists, so nothing against them at all. Said to me once in a conversation, "At least I have a proper pastor," and what she meant was that her pastor was white, right? And I heard that with my own ears, that example. So I am in no doubt that a lot of us, a lot of Black people, have bought into the white savior philosophy that is all around us, you know, from the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus right on through to the guy who runs a plantation is white, but actually, you know, he can be good if you take care and do what you're told. And who is going to keep you in your place? The overseer, who was very often light of skin, light of complexion, and is next in the pecking order to the white boss. And when you look around this country right now, I just put it to you that plantation, that plantocracy of white on top, light skin in the middle, and the darkies are the ones who are the plantation workers, is still there. Very much. And finally, let me just say, you know, I'm a Christian and I believe that all human beings are of the same value. Absolutely. So I do not have anything about if you're white. I've got lots of white allies, lots of white people who have been very good to me since I've lived here. I've said the other day that at almost every key point in my life in this country, and I've had a long life here, and reasonably successful one, there have been white people at those points. So I'm not sort of demonizing every white person, but I'm just saying the system is such that it encourages us to seek white validation. It seemed to me that that's what we want most of all. So if you're in a Black church like I am, you know, that's a sect, it used to be called. Now, of course, it has moved on from there. So I'm in no doubt that plantation system of white, colored, Black is on show in this country, and you don't have to look too deep.
As a mother, I think for me, it's quite worrying because a lot of our children are living in single parenthood families, and the only chance that they have of seeing leadership, male, Black, strong, is in our Black churches. And if we cannot show that and always end up in a white, predominantly church, how do we then empower our boys to be who they need to be? And I think my question is, is being in a white majority church helpful to the formation and the minds and building the mindset of our boys who really need an identity, are living in identity crisis right now?
Well, that's why we need strong Black leaders. And I just want to take a cue from what Bishop Aldred said, that I've not read the report myself, but I was listening to a brief report that came out within the Football Association today. And it was a report that was done on commentators and those who comment on football matches. And the statements, and it was clear from the percentages, the number of phrases that were used to describe black footballers, and the same phrases that were used to describe white footballers were statistically miles apart. And so when it came to describing people of power and of pace, of energy, it was the typical black footballer. When you wanted to talk about intelligence and having strategy and clear thinking, it was the white footballer. And so using that same, the system itself, the stats bear it out that there's racism. There is no doubt about it, because it's not about people saying, no, I don't see racism. The system shows there's racism. Football, just as an example, and I know we're taking us slightly off point, but football, for example, they're at least 20 to 30% footballers in this country. And at the very top of the game, the majority, 70, 80, 90% of coaches, and those at the top of boards, of football boards, are white. And you don't have the same representation of that community within the football and sports represented at the very top. So when you talk about plantation, that is just the system bears it out. And you can see that even in health sectors, you can see it in energy, you can see it in almost every sector in this country.
So
what it does, by the way, it then leads people to lean in that direction. I mentioned earlier I was born in Jamaica. As a boy, as a teenager, I remember going to look about my papers to come to England. My parents were already here. And at 14 years of age, 15 years of age, I was looking about my papers. When I went to Spanish Town in Kingston in Jamaica, and you went into the travel agency or you went to the passport office, I never saw nobody that looked like me behind the counter. They were all thin-lipped and light-skinned and straight-nosed. With pressed hair, right? They were mimicking who they know are successful in the culture, and you're light skin or you're white, and we unconsciously maybe lean in that direction. And in some respects, what we're doing, and it goes back to the point about the microaggression of people asking where you really from. We are in a flight away from our blackness. That is a constant trait of us in this country. We're in a flight away from blackness. And I wouldn't be surprised if one of the reasons we find something so obnoxious, so much against our will, is because it's reminding us too much of who we are. And why are you calling me black when I've already grown out of blackness, as it were? And I think if Jonathan talked about quite rightly, strong black leadership, which our young black people need to see.
Yeah.
But to be strong, any strong tree has deep roots. Marcus Garvey said that a people or a person without knowledge of their history is like a tree without roots. And one of the big mistakes that I think too many of us make is what we think that somehow our Christianity replaces our ethnicity, and it doesn't. Your Christianity and the Christian community to which we belong suffers from nearly all the ills of the world. It doesn't replace your ethnicity. And if we cease to be, to feel that we belong, if we have grown out of our Africanness, my Caribbeanness, my culture, then what it means is that I don't have roots and I'm not going to be strong. And that's why, Faith and my colleagues, I tell you, one of the things I'm most pleased about growing up in this country from the age of 15 is that my church has been a black space where I've been able to look up to. The people who pray for me are black, the people around me are black. And from that place of strength and encouragement, I have been able to have a ministry that reaches way beyond that community.
And I think when I go back to Pastor Yemi, a conversation earlier on when he was saying that the fact that you're Nigerian, the fact that you have those roots help you to maneuver those wide spaces in a way that other people wouldn't be able to do so. And I think when we look at the Caribbean route, because it's younger and maybe not as strong, we have the plantation mentality. Would that be correct, Pastor Yemi?
Absolutely correct. Because as much as I agree with Bishop, I think I differ in many ways. Because let's look at some of us who are in this country. Why are many people from Africa or Nigeria, West Africa in this country? For a couple of reasons. Political escape, economic escape, or for education. Our early parents, when they came here in the 60s, they were sponsored by the government to come to university to be educated so that they can go back for the independence, right? That's what most of our parents came here to in this country for. When I came into this country, I didn't come because I want to have a white supremacist, to be under white supremacy, or to change my identity, or to say probably I want to become a white person. Far out of it. I am doing what I'm doing in white space because it's a call from God. God called me from my black majority church and said this to me: you are a missionary. And if you're a missionary and you are in another land, to reach the people in the land, you have to understand the context without losing your identity, where you come from. Because for you to reach out to the people I'm calling you to, you have to learn some things, you have to deconstruct some things, and you have to engage in that context. So I am doing my own from a position of a call and a mission. And so it's something that we need to understand. We find ourselves in that space. So even when I'm amongst my white church leaders or whatever, I never question my identity. I introduce myself from the position of my heritage, identity, my background, and my context. In fact, I say to them, I might not speak English the way you are speaking English. It's because I'm not originally English and I don't want to be. And I have my root, I have my identity. I educate people. I never lose my identity where I come from. As a matter of fact, I come from a royal family. So I don't lose the fact that I'm a prince where I come from. And I guess it's the same thing for most people because I know my context and my background. But more, I would imagine that it's different if you don't know your background, your context, the roots, and all those things. That's why it's important for people. You're talking about young people. It's important for us to take them back home, to know where they come from, to know where they belong, to know their roots, so that when they are engaging in this context, they are not engaging from the position of I'm subservient. I'm engaging from the position of I know who I am and I know my identity. And so if you know that, you will even understand that the context of a white man on top, a mixed race in between, and a black man below is not something you want to, it's not a narrative you want to adjudge with. I'm called to be the head and not the tail. I'm not trying to work out whether I'm in the middle or whatever. There's no better place for me than to be on top, because that's what God has called me to. Wherever I find myself, whatever I'm doing, and whatever I'm leading. So I think it's also has to do in who you are in God. So if you know who you are in God, what has created you for, your identity in God, no man can suppress you. You will always overcome that because it is God in you that will make the difference.
What I'm thinking of when I listen to this is, if you are of Nigerian or African descent, and we have very strong roots, etc., but then we end up in the white space. And how can we set that we are strong in our roots and sit under a leadership that doesn't understand our culture, doesn't understand our problems, doesn't understand our background, and yet we are availing ourselves to their leadership? Pastor Jonathan?
Well, that's a very. I'm listening to Bishop, and I fully understand what Bishop is saying, and I'm listening to Reverend Yemi, and I fully understand what he's saying. That's why I said it's not. There's not a black and white answer to this. It's there are nuances, and depending on your age. And my children have grown up here. They know that they're from Nigeria, but they are intrinsically British in their education and in their outlook. So my wife and our family have to constantly remind them of who they are. So the millennial generation and the generation below that have grown up in the West, their mindset of identity is not as rooted sometimes as the older generation that have maybe spent their youth or their childhood in either Jamaica, or the Caribbean or Africa. And so when they come here, the context in which they find themselves is the context in which Bishop has mentioned, where Black people are challenged by the system. The system. When I first came here and I met up my friends, we used to live in Islington stroke Hackney. They were afraid of the police, and I don't understand, why are you afraid of the police? Where I come from, we pay the police on the street. But here, you know, if 3 or 4 men are young Black men are in a car, they get stopped. I didn't understand. It took me time for me to understand the us and them construct that had developed on the streets of Hackney and Brixton and some Black areas between so-called white police and the young Black men of Black community, and that's a shame. It's a product of the fall of man, of sin, of racism is sin. Discrimination is a sinful Adamic nature, and we want to dominate. We want to make other people different. We want to make them feel inferior. It's just the fallen nature of man.
Can I just say, sorry?
Yes.
Well, I'm kind of guessing, because the question that I was going to ask is, if white churches are now accepting that they have institutional racism within them, that they're still continuing with it, that there is glass ceiling for our brothers and sisters in the main white stream churches, and nothing is being done about it, what is the biblical position for them to continue exercising that?
Well, you know, when the Archbishop of Canterbury is I'd almost say a friend, we certainly work together. But I'm afraid when I hear people applauding him for saying in Synod last year that the church is institutionally racist and he repents, or like a couple of days that Jesus was not white, he was Middle Eastern, and people applaud, I'm saying I just don't get the reason for the applause. I'm afraid these are facts which have been known for years and years and years. So, you know, sometimes, again, I think our appreciation of whiteness is at such a level that we clap them for, you know, almost anything. Like, we're just glad that they've woken up to something. I think it shows a certain lack of depth in our own self-understanding and our self-knowledge. I want to answer your question, but can I just point to one thing, which I think I have noticed, not tonight in this conversation, but tonight as well, which I think that those of us, maybe you're right, Jonathan, of a certain age maybe, but I think some of us, those of us who are from the Caribbean, probably have a different perspective on race and on this country than those of you who come direct from Africa here. And I'm generalizing because, as Yemi pointed out a while ago, several Africans from Africa, I'm an African from the Caribbean, right, have been the recent beneficiaries of education, of privileges and so forth. And so tend to see this country, you know, through more sympathetic eyes, I think it'd be fair to say. Whereas for me, as a Jamaican, as the son of enslaved people who endured, you know, nearly 600 years of dehumanization, I'm afraid I see this country through those lenses. And if you ask me what is the biblical position, my biblical position is that, as Jonathan just said, I regard the reason they did it, racism, white supremacy, as a sin. So the question then is, so how do I set myself to deal with that sin and the sinner? Well, the way I prefer to look at it is this. There is no sin that I'm aware of. Murder, genocide, rape, pedophilia, any. There's none that I know that we say about it, notwithstanding the fallenness of humanity, that we're going to get rid of it. It's going to go from the world. But we do somehow apply that thinking to racism. And I do ask people to think again. And so if we bring in the era now of George Floyd and the murder of that man in cold blood and broad daylight, and people say, well, you know, one day the world will be free from racism and you won't see that. And I say to you, to anybody who cares to listen, you name me another sin that we are so ambitious of that it will disappear from the earth. And when you've answered that, you'll come back to recognizing that racism is an aspect of human fallenness. And whilst indeed there are degrees and it can be tempered and laws can govern it, I say to Black people, treat racism like you would look after your young daughter, recognizing that there is the possibility of her or a young boy being taken advantage of. You can't cure it from the human psyche or the human sinful disposition. So what you do is you set up structures to protect your daughter and your son from such perpetrators. That's what you do. And I think, again, it is the way in which I believe that white supremacist thought has found its way into Black psyche, that somehow we think the only thing we can do to that thing is A, to be ambitious enough to think that somehow these white folks are all going to stop being racist and then we'll be fine. And B, we don't think that we need to do anything to protect ourselves from it.
Yeah, can I just come in there, Bishop? I think one of the ways in which you deal with it, you know, the Bible says this, that let your light shine, that the glory of the Lord. I believe that we need glorious Black women and glorious Black men that can stand in their space in the glory and the image of how God made them to be, and just shine and just say, I am Black and I'm proud, and this is what I can achieve as a person. I don't need to how do I put it? I don't need to ask for permission to be who I am. This is the glory of God shining through me. I say this, and this is another mute point I'm just throwing in there. If Lewis Hamilton was white, the way he would be celebrated, I've read articles about this, so this is not just my thinking. If Lewis Hamilton, 6-time world champion, you know, was white, the way he would, the kind of awards he would have got, he would be a star by now. He would have received all kinds of accolades, but because he is not, so you just see again and again this this thing coming through. And so what Lewis can do at other people like him is to continue to shine his light and be who he can be, so that he can represent the epitome or the model of the Black race that can conquer, achieve anything anyone else can achieve, and even do better.
That, of course, is the model of the Jeremiah 29, to which I referred earlier, where Jeremiah writes to the Jews in Babylon and says, now finding yourself in Babylon, what you do is settle down,
yes,
build your houses and live in them, plant your fields and eat from them, marry and give your children into marriage, and pray for the good of the city, because if it prospers, you prosper.
Yeah,
there is a line of self-contentedness about your identity, even in Babylon, that you don't go chasing the favor of Babylon. What you do is you sit in your space and you fill that space, and you become powerful by filling that space and letting everybody know who cares to hear that, by the way, my family lived back in Judah. Not that every day you wake up thinking, how can I lay my claim to being a Babylonian? Which is what I hear all the time about British identity. I'm British, I'm British, I'm British. And I'm wondering, well, are you anything else? Are you Jamaican? Are you Barbadian? Are you African? What are you? You know, sorry, Jamaica and Barbados don't quite equate to Africa. I said, are you Ghanaian or whatever, right?
I know. I get the, yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah, so I worry a lot, and maybe that's just a sign of my age, but I worry a lot about the way in which particularly younger people seem to be growing out of blackness, seem to be, and even George Floyd. Again, I worry about George Floyd because we are putting so much premium by what is going to change.
Yeah.
Now, in light of George Floyd, I just remind people that when the likes of Martin Luther King was murdered, having just said, I have a dream, many of us figured that this was a seismic change in the situation in the world. And when Stephen Lawrence was murdered, when Kelso Cochrane was murdered in this country in 1948. And so we and of course, good has come out of those tragedies. But what has not changed is that the racism that runs through the Western culture, church or not, like a Blackpool rock, has continued to exist. So, Reverend Yemi, I hear you loud and clear about your calling. I would not in any way choose to contest that calling to work in white spaces. I can only say that it is part of my own calling, and I do it. But in terms of where I'm grateful to God for having planted me and watered and nurtured me. I'm very pleased that in this here Babylon, I have been able to live that out in a local church life, which is Black.
I think it's quite good that we have someone like, Pastor Yemi in the white space, because then we have a spy within the building.
Well, there are two of us. Actually, to some extent, Jonathan also works in white spaces.
Yes, it's true. But my question to Pastor Yemi, again, it goes back to the question I was asking: what is the biblical position, or what is the church position when it comes to racism? We have identified that it is a sin, and if it is a sin, how is it that we still haven't been able to cure it out of the church?
Because we didn't cure no other sin.
That is very good. Yes.
Bishop answers is an overarching answer. Anything underneath that will not be it cannot stand the ground. It's a sin. As long as you can't cure all the sin, you will still have to live with that sin. But like any other thing, is to build a structure, a protection around it. For example, in church, if you steal, do people still steal in church? Yes. Do people still commit adultery in church? Absolutely, yes. So, but we put a kind of a measure in there that if you commit adultery, you're going to get defrauded. This is going to happen. And if you steal money, we're going to hand you over to the police, or we're going to defraud you, or one way or the other. Or if a member of the church, we can excommunicate you. Now, will that be the same case for racism in church? How do you define it? What do you want to say that this is actually an act of racism, an aggressive racism, or a subtle one, or a micro one? So,
does it? And I'm just going to cut you because yes, it's true. We talked about that. Is there overt racism and subconscious bias, etc.? But at the end of the day, all these definitions still say that there is racism. So are we now going to qualify them and quantify them because we're trying to make it easy for our counterparts to say, oh, well, we were not conscious of what we were doing? Or are we just going to call it what it is, which is racism? And
well, I think the biggest challenge for us with racism is, I would say that, wouldn't I? It's the point I was making. I try to deal with this in one of my books, Thinking Outside the Box, where I'm saying that it is partly, in my view, because we have such a high view of whiteness that we think we cannot do like David said in the Psalms, thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. We don't somehow think that we can do that. We think the only way Black people can really survive here is if racism is no more. So my worry would be for Yemi is that in his work amongst whites, that he would think, I don't think he does, that he would think that work amongst whites is somehow to purge them of their racism, and that racism will be gone one day. So it because it isn't going, we have to work out how do we deal with it. But that thing, Faith, about microaggression, different forms of racism, unconscious bias, isn't much different to other sins. You know, like I do, that you take the sin of rape, for example. We know there are many shades, aren't there? Of was it the woman's fault? Was it the man? You know, did she say no? Did she not say no? I mean, there are shades, and people defend themselves. Even stealing, there are fine lines sometimes about whether that was theft or whether, even with murder, there is sometimes manslaughter. It's because of diminished responsibility. So all sins get that same gradation of treatment, and you know how extreme it was. And so racism is equally like that. Now, there was a time, wasn't there, in the Windrush era, when my parents would have come to England and they would have gone to rent a room somewhere, and in the window of that house that put up the sign, you know, for rent, rooms to let, but underneath it would be no dogs, no Irish, no blacks. Now, that was egregious. Now, today, the law makes that illegal. Right? You cannot do that. The Teddy Boys are running around terrorizing people in the 1940s and 50s. They are no longer able to do that, and so on and so forth. And we've had a number of anti-racist measures, which are all part of what is necessary to control and temper racism in the church. What, if you ask me, what I would like to see in white churches is a zero tolerance of racism, albeit that I agree there are gradations and so on. So we can argue over, you know, what was the nature of it. But in terms of the penalty, there should be zero tolerance. And Desmond Tutu once said that racism is like spitting in the face of God, because God, who has made each of us in God's image and likeness, we are then turning around saying to God that creature that you have made and said is in your image and likeness, that person, that Joe Aldred there, is not fully human. That's a crime against God.
Dr. Jonathan, how are we going to put policies in place to ensure that our brothers and sisters who are in the mainstream churches are gonna be, even if they experience it, they have a system of grievances where they can go and really take it to the leadership? Because it seems like people are complaining and it goes somewhere, and then maybe we're going to do an African day or a multicultural day, for instance, to quiet the voices, and then tomorrow it's forgotten and microaggression starts again, or you're not allowed to lead or be part of the board of executives, but you can only lead worship. What are we going to do and put in place so that in those churches our members or our Black members are able to progress within the church?
I think it's difficult to define a set of rules and laws, as Bishop Aldred just already said, that progressive waves of anti-racism, civil rights movements have gradually chipped away at legislation to create laws and bylaws that help us deal, at least publicly or socially, with racism. But racism is still here, alive and well in this day. No amount of laws in the church or outside of the church can legislate the heart of man. So even though there's no longer no Irish, no dogs, no blacks on the windows, it's still in the hearts, written on the hearts of some people. And that can only be dealt with, in my opinion, by education, healthy relationships, and the Black community itself globally celebrating and glorifying its own achievements, its own image and identity. We cannot fight amongst ourselves. So, I mean, simple things like having legislation to quota systems, have the number of Black or minority group or leaders at every level as represented in that church or that community, as they're doing in other organizations or industries right now. This whole George Floyd wave is going to create another level of awareness and principles that are going to come into the corporate world and even into the church. But it is not going to eradicate racism. I think one of the things that can change racism is for the Black man to arise and shine, for us to be happy with the way God made our hair, the way God made our skin, the way God made our lips, for us to be happy with our blackness, not stop bleaching, stop straightening our hair, stop trying to be light if we are dark, and if whatever color God has made us, let us glorify God in that image and celebrate our blackness. That is one way by which I feel self-identity and the glory that God has put on the black man and the black race, for it to shine forth on all levels of black communities. Both.
But there's thanks, Jonathan. But if I just add a little bit, and then
yes, go on.
We forget the fact that there is a window of opportunities for us right now, for people of the black race, in view of this. I say that because I'm exposed to that. I agree what the Bishop says. If you don't put structure, system, and process in place, it will just be like the way we've been. So part of that is the acknowledgement that this thing is a spiritual thing, just like any other thing. And then being aware and to acknowledge that. And then put in place, like, I really agree with the zero tolerance. So if we have a rule in organizations, but let's look at church and Christian charity organizations. If part of the policy of the organization is, in this church or in this organization, we have zero tolerance to anything that is of racial injustice or racism or stuff like that, is a very good way to start. So when people are joining, they almost sign a document, I don't know, something like that, that in this organization, this is our value. And it's being taught regularly as part of the process and value of what people do, because it's now engraved in the system, in the structure, and the process of how the organization is run. And then number two thing that is really key, really important, is I am of a very strong opinion out of my experience in this country that you cannot change anything until you sit around the table of those who are making decisions.
Yeah, but my point is, we've always been begging for breadcrumbs. And I think, this discussion started even way before some of us were born. So the discussion with the white church has been happening for a long time. We've been trying to negotiate for a long time. We've been trying to get into leadership for a long time. Pastor Yemi, you probably one of the few in the Church of England who is black. How many bishops do we have? How many black students do we have in the theological and Bible schools today? So the question is, what is going to be our mindset and our strength in trying to change this situation for the better as from tomorrow? Because we can't continue saying we've had this discussion.
The opportunity is there for us, because I think from where I'm sitting, I think I'm inundated with requests on a daily basis from organizations, from establishments, even from churches, who are now saying that we really want to change now. Where do we get people to come onto the leadership role? And even in our recruitment, in our roles, in our sort of all these things, it's in there. Now, it wasn't there a month ago, but suddenly these opportunities are created. I could list up to 10 senior roles that people are asking me, do you know anybody for this role? Because we are changing. We want to get into all this. Now, if these opportunities are there, that means whatever we may call George Floyd circumstance an issue, it has created an open space for us to get in the things. And what I was trying to say to you earlier is this: you cannot change anything until you sit around the table of those at the top that are making decisions. Or her decision will always be passed to you that you are not part of, you are not even in the consideration of those decisions. So I think for us too, opportunities for us to step up, to step up in terms of what God has put into us, what we have acquired, our uniqueness in what we are. I sat with an organization yesterday, big organization. The whole management team, the whole leadership team listened to me, going from one department to the other for a whole day. Now, that would not have happened before. Why? They are intentional about changing, about integration, and about moving things forward, because things are not going to be the way they are. So
I just hope
we must come up in
Yemi,
terms of our,
Yes,
Yemi, Yemi, I just hope that they paid you well for the time that you spent with them.
they
That's
do,
all.
boy. I don't
Right.
know.
Now, listen, I mean, you talk about opportunities and this being a time of opportunity. I've lived in a time of opportunity. I remember 25 years ago when I started working in this space that I now work in, ecumenism on the wider front. I remember then I used to go around, I used to talk to people like Christian Aid and Tear Fund saying, "Oh, what are you doing about Black people? Why are you only showing those pictures of dying children with flies coming out the nose?" And so on. And they would say to me, "Joe, give us a couple of names." And 25 years ago, I didn't have those names to give them. Today, there are lots of names that I can and do give. So some of us have been taking advantage of some of those opportunities for some time. And I would agree with you that there is some momentum around the George Floyd murder, without a doubt. But I do warn against, as an old man, I do warn against over expectation of what this will provide. Because what tends to happen in these moments is heightened sensitivity. And, it's like the repentant sinner. But then tomorrow is another day. Okay.
Yeah.
And what I believe will really make a difference. It isn't about people changing their heart, and I don't care if people don't want to love me, but don't face it with me, right? Don't mess with me. So the laws, as far as I'm concerned, are important. The law that says don't put up a sign in your window that disrespects me by putting up a sign saying no dogs, no blacks, no Irish, that's important to me. Not because it now puts love in your heart for me, but because at least in the public square I can walk down the road with my dignity without that reflecting on me. And I think racism has a lot to do with that. It's not about changing people's hearts, because God does that work and their exposure to education does that work. But for me, I am talking about what should and should not be acceptable in the church in terms of behavior.
Yeah.
Well, I don't care what your heart is saying. I'm just telling you, don't spit in my face. Now, you may have it in your heart to spit in my face, right? But don't you dare. Otherwise, something's going to happen to you. So I'm not getting into your heart about what's in there. I'm saying there need to be strong laws governing our behavior in the church and in the public square.
My question is therefore, what is it that our counterpart are fearing from allowing us to attain position within the leadership of the main churches and be able to be an example to our families, bring in our culture? Because the church is a multipod of culture, of ethnicity, and we cannot say therefore that the mainstream white churches is the only way.
Can I just come back in quick? I don't think they're fearing anything. I don't think they're fearing anything. I think what it is in most white people's minds is the inferiority with which they hold Black people. And they don't believe that you can do it the way, to the standard that they want it or in the way they want it, right? But can I want to say this, and I forgot, my old brain wasn't working. Yemi was talking, Yemi said, rather throwaway line-ish that he's from royal stock, right? I wish I were, but I'm not. I'm only in my house. Now, let me show you something about the Church of England to show you that nothing changes. Everything changes, but nothing changes. Over the last several years, we've had the opportunity to engage with Archbishop Sentamu. He spent some time in Birmingham and worked very close together. Lovely guy, friend of mine. Archbishop Sentamu, for a long time, was the only archbishop, the Black archbishop the Church of England has had in this country. But you look, similar to the royal lineage of Yemi Adedeji. You look at the pedigree of John Sentamu, a High Court judge back home, right? So he sits nicely into the Anglican hierarchy, the system that recognizes titles and lineage. Right, and I think if you look at what the Church of England has done over the years very well, it has tended to bring into its ranks people, particularly Africans from Africa, as opposed to people grown up in its midst right here, and we see that as a general trend. So what I guess I'm saying to you is, take a look at what has brought change. It isn't those transient things of the Church of England spotting somebody with pedigree and says, we have you, you're all right, but the rest aren't. What I believe really brings change, lasting change, beyond George Floyd, the spike in interest, is structural things. And that's why I said up the top that Black people in white spaces should always set about constructing caucuses if you're going to live in those spaces. Construct a support network that is going to be with you. Because believe me, after a month, a year, 10 years after George Floyd, believe me, like an elastic, it will come right back to where it belonged, unless there is a competing power structure that is going to be up against the power structure that exists. And that's why the Labour Party, by the way, the Labour Party never had any Black MPs until Black sections was established back in the 70s.
The church in the UK is quite divided in subcultures. You know, we have the Africans, we have the Afro-Caribbean, we have and then within the Africans, we are even divided by countries and et cetera. So how can we then come together as one voice to speak against the injustices?
That's a tall order, but I think the main thing is that we identify by our skin color and not just by our nationalities. Because if you try to unite a Nigerian with Senegalese or different parts of Africa, we are divided by language. But one thing that unites us is our shared history and our color. And I feel that if we are able to rise above our different tribal nationalities, identities, we can do much. I always celebrate any unity and coming together of Caribbean and African on any level, because I believe that it's part, in my opinion, of a redemptive reconciliatory spirit of what has divided us through slavery in our recent history. So I believe unity is important. I believe dialogue is important, and I believe that if we can rise above a common enemy, which is racism, and put aside our differences, we can do so much. So much has been said about structures. I feel that with each wave, every opportunity, we can create a new water level below which we won't go below. And so with this new opportunity, we can set in structures that rise within the corporate world, rise within industry, rise within politics and bylaws, within the church itself, zero tolerance, communication, new constitutions. All of those things can be put into place so that by the time this wave settles, it will never go below a particular watermark that we have set, because we have been intelligent and we have taken advantage of the opportunity that has been given to us by this wave.
Pastor Yemi, looking at all the meetings you've had behind the scenes concerning this issue, what is coming in the pipeline for us in terms of policy or structures that is going to help the Black members in the church?
I think Bishop Joe will know that one of the most constructive outcome will have been what I think Pastor Ago came out with 10 pointers of different things that I think will be published soon, because it's being shared by other organizations. Part of that will be education, part of that will be prayer, part of that will be inclusiveness of bringing people to leadership role. Part of that, I mean, there are a lot of things, about 10 things I think will be published later on, because most of the things that people are discussing in terms of how to navigate the future constructively through system and structure are all in there. And there's no point in duplicating or trying to try something new. They'll all be there. But for me personally, I've always argued the fact that educating, you are a teacher, you understand this. educating children from the early age is extremely important to know that we are all created in the image of God, so that we don't start to fight at an older age. If Martin Luther King have dealt with the downstream, we will not be fighting with the upstream now. So, or else 20, 30 years down the line, we'll still be saying the same thing. So let's go back to the kids who are born today. And how do we deal with that? So that in 20, 30 years time, probably we might not have eradicated racism, just like we wouldn't do for theft, or all sorts of things. But there is a measure, there's a particular guide along the line that will change things for us. And I think those are the kind of things that will work. But also, I want to agree with Bishop that what is key for any organization. That's why I do not like only one black face in a white space. It doesn't work. In fact, it's worse. So I would think that in any organization or church sect, it is important to create a black caucus within that organization, where the power base to influence the bigger organization comes from. A one man, one director, one chief executive can't do it. You need a caucus, a support base that will help you to produce and reproduce while you are there and when you are gone. So these are helpful for us to think about for the future.
Amen. Well, we're coming to the end of the program, and I want you to maybe give us a 1 minute closing conclusion. We're never going to be able to finish this discussion, and we're going to have another part 3 in a couple of weeks' time, where we will be discussing more of how to address this issue of racial injustices in the church. But before we close, Pastor Jonathan, last word.
Well, I would be calling on pastors, leaders, bishops, and all those in leadership across the wide spectrum of church to rise up and not be passive about racism, but actually aggressive to stand against it within the season that we're in, and seize every opportunity that we can to discuss it, and also to set in structures to educate people, both white and black, within their congregations about racism and how we can look at other human beings and accord them their dignity, irrespective of their color. And that has to be represented at every leadership level. So I believe that leadership levels of denominations and churches should look at their leadership as opposed to their congregation and their constituencies, and make sure that the leadership it tallies with the constitution, with their members. And that, I believe, is very important, that we seize this opportunity that is presented to us.
Sandra Godley says we need to be organized and have a clear strategy. Bishop, what is your last word?
Well, my last word is to absolutely agree with that. The question is, what's our vision of the world that we would like to live in as Black people? What's our vision of it? But my last words really would be about recognizing the historic roots of racism. And to recognize that it is about power, and to lose our naive romanticism around, trying to get rid of racism. But to recognize actually that in addition to strong laws and strong caucuses in white spaces, that we should recognize that the rest of the power lies with us. So Black people need to be transcendent about racism. We need to find a way of flourishing even in its presence. And we need to do that by becoming strong, spiritually, psychologically, economically, and politically. And we need to do that if we hold our space. Jeremiah 29 again is my model. If we hold our space, even in the shadow of Babylon, we can thrive.
Wonderful. Pastor Yemi.
I think for me, first of all, I want to just say a big thank you, and I want to applaud the white church leaders who have come out so strong against this. There are many of them. They've named it what it is. And for those who are putting structure and system in place within their organization, within their churches, to say they are going to stand, and they are conscious of their own biasness and prejudices, and they want to do something to bring a difference. So I salute you. And for those who have not, white church leaders who are passive about it or didn't see it as anything that they want to speak about, well, you have your reasons. But can I just say that racism is a sin, and it's not something that God would want us to do to each other as believers. So it's about time for such people to stand up and call it what it is and look within themselves before they look out the world and the people that God has created. And for us, the Black people, I think, like Bishop said, the time has come for us as well to begin to create our own, I won't call it empire, but our own world where we're economically strong, we are politically strong. We create our own caucus, nationally, regionally, locally, whereby decisions are not being made unless we are referred to or a reference is required from us to shape either people, stories, or whatever that might want to affect the community where we live. And the time has come for us to really come and bound together strongly and be each other's keeper in this land that God has called us. So that would be my own closing statement.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much to my panel today. Thank you, Dr. Jonathan. Thank you, Bishop Joe Aldred, and thank you, Canon Yemi. Thank you so much for joining me on Roundtable Talk with Rev Faith for a racial injustice. And the theme today was the church and racism part 2. We are going to do a part 3, which will be around the 14th of July. So I want you to tune in. Next week, we will be talking gospel music and racial injustices again. And that will be the part 2 of that episode. So please do join in and share this episode to your friends, to your family, so that they can also understand how to stand in their churches against racial injustices. Be encouraged. The word today was that we need to congregate, get together, organize, be organized, and strategize for our position to be stronger when we negotiate with our white counterparts, whether it is in church, whether it is in business, whether it is in education. And we need to now be building for our future, for our children who may not understand the roots and the culture from where they come from and have a weaker foundation. And that foundation needs to be built by your contribution from what you are going to build tomorrow. So stay tuned. We are continuing this discussion. It's not the end, but you can watch it again on replay. Please watch us on Facebook Live. We are available on YouTube. We're also available on Instagram, LCBN UK Television. Please do tune in, www.livecomtv.com. Until next week, take care of yourself.
Lifecom Broadcasting Network TV, aka LCBN TV, is committed to bringing the transformation message of Jesus Christ into homes across the world, providing hope in the most desperate situations. We are passionate about souls, reaching the lost, the hurt, and the lonely, and by a click of a button, God can change a person's life forever. Watch LCBN TV channel 24/7 on UK Freeview channel 271, Roku TV, Amazon Fire TV, Android TV, Apple TV, See Love World, Google TV, LCBNTV.com, LifecomTV.com. Download LCBN TV app from Google